now. Okay, so hello everybody, welcome to this Advocacy Cities event behind the Greenwash, how corporate advertising damages our human rights and environment and what we can do about it. My name is Nicola, I'm Outreach Director at Advocacy Cities. I'm not going to talk to you for too long because we have some great speakers it would be great to leave time after that as well for questions at the end. So, but firstly, why are we here this evening? Well, advertising is all around us, whether we think we notice it or not. And advertising is influencing us, whether we like it or not. We are Adfree Cities. We have a particular focus on challenging advertising in public places, because that kind of advertising is really so intrusive that we have no choice and are able to grant, we're not able to grant or refuse our consent. What kind of advertising do we see on billboards and digital advertising screens in our cities? It's usually for big brands selling us new cars, fashion, junk food, supermarkets, expensive holidays, products which are driving the climate and ecological crises, undermining our well-being, our environment and our local economy. Not to mention the issues caused by the structures themselves, like pollution, energy use, distraction, distress to local residents. And just to quickly illustrate that, these are some testimonials that were gathered by our group Adblock Bristol for their campaign recently to try and remove this huge digital advertising screen, which is in a neighbourhood in Bristol. So you can see that these advertising really is having a deep effect on people who live there. So what we do is we work locally to prevent advertising sites like this. Our groups, Advocacy Cities groups around the country, have had success in opposing dozens of digital advertising screens and keeping them out of cities. So we do local community campaigning and work to prevent digital advertising screens in local communities. Here was a screen that was successfully prevented in South London. So we also, what else do? We also showcase arts and nature and ad-free space as positive alternatives to corporate advertising in public places. And we help people to imagine what our streets might be like without corporate advertising and with more space for creativity, for community and for conversation. And then we also lobby for policy change. Our groups have had some success recently with a new policy to restrict harmful advertising in Bristol. And also a motion in Norwich, which for the council, which has committed to go even further than Bristol. So today we're looking very much at the content of the advertising. How is this medium actively enabling big corporations to spread misinformation and conceal the reality of their harmful industries, and how we can challenge this? Advertising has always, bent or enhanced the truth in order to sell us products. But today we're surely seeing some really astonishingly brazen tactics, even by the standards of the advertising industry and the industries that they support. Citizens, we are being misled, and it's a threat to transparency, to trust, to the positive collective action that we know needs to happen. But the good news is that we can take action, and that's what our speakers today will be talking about. So I will stop sharing now, and I will invite Charlotte to speak to us first. Charlotte is National Coordinator at Advocacy Cities and will talk to you about a recent report that we brought out on advertising and human rights. Welcome, Charlotte.
Hi, so yeah, I'm going to share my screen now. I am not Elizabeth Harrop, but hopefully I will do her incredible report justice. So, okay, so At What Cost is a report that was produced for us, Advocacy Cities, in June this year by Elizabeth Harrop, who's a human rights consultant. It basically provides a comprehensive literature review and research anthology on the impacts of advertising and consumerism on human, community and planetary well-being, and includes information on how to use international law and international tools to challenge the human rights violations and climate impacts that are caused by excessive consumption supported by advertising. So it brings together evidence on the multiple rights violations perpetrated by advertising and the associated excessive consumption that it supports, and shows why we should all be paying much more attention to the pervasiveness of advertising in our lives and the impact that has. So the report is aimed at a broad audience of stakeholders, those concerned with consumerism, climate change, and the moral issues around advertising. And then different relevant sections of the report can be pulled out and drawn from, and the research in there used in advocacy, campaigning, policy making, to address the linked challenges of corporate power, human rights, and environmental justice. So it's an incredible tool. There's a lot of information in there. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the kind of key messages from the report now. So one of the messages is that the spend on advertising is incredibly disproportionate to the spend on humanitarian aid and obviously the environment as well. And the big stat that we pulled out from the report is that in 2020, advertisers globally spent 557.3 billion, and that was despite a downward trend due to COVID-19. So even if no COVID-19 had happened, it probably would have been more. And that's largely promoting consumption. And this is 14 times the $40 billion needed in 2020 to support record levels of global humanitarian assistance, again, because of COVID-19. So at the beginning of 2020, global humanitarian requirements were already close to $30 billion, with 168 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. And then this rose to a record 40 billion due to COVID-19, yet that was dwarfed by the spend on advertising. So another key message is how the impact of advertising and consumerism is on human rights and the environment. So they are both negatively impacted by advertising and consumerism in multiple direct and indirect ways. And particularly the environmental impacts are closely linked to human rights impact. So the idea that environment and human rights issues are separate is not at all the case. So protecting the environment and human rights are interrelated. Protecting the environment helps to protect human rights, in fact. A safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is integral to the full enjoyment of a wide range of human rights, including rights to life, health, food, water, and sanitation. Therefore, protecting human rights helps to protect the environment. And when people are able to learn about and participate in the decisions that affect them, such as exercising their rights to freedom of information and expression, they can help to ensure that those decisions respect their need for a sustainable environment as well. And the report looks at the international human rights system, which explicitly acknowledges that the relationship between environmental degradation and human rights is a close one. This degradation can be caused by activities or events such as climate change, desertification, and in particular mining operations. And the special representative of the UN Secretary General on Business and Human Rights reviewed 320 cases of alleged corporate-related human rights abuses and found that nearly 1/3 of the cases involved environmental harm that also affected human rights, including the rights to life, health, food, and housing. So they're very closely connected. In October 2020, the Human Rights Council also adopted a resolution on children and the environment that recognises that environmental harm, including that resulting from climate change, directly breaches children's rights. And the resolution includes a call for all states to consider recognising the right to a healthy environment in their national laws. So these ideas are also being taken up by the UN and the treaty bodies, who I'm going to talk about in a minute. So what's about the impact on outdoor advertising? So obviously that's something that as Adfree Cities we focus on. And in terms of the UN and other treaty bodies, also they're aware of these connections. So the UN Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights urges that public spaces are conduits for realising human rights for all. The human rights framework should be applied to the design, development and maintenance of public spaces in urban, rural, natural and digital spaces. So if states and international organisations and the international community do not take the issue of public space seriously and fail to understand it as a basic question of human rights, it will be impossible to fulfil cultural rights and indeed many of the other universal human rights. So the idea of billboards taking over our public space and taking that space from us is really key to human rights. Billboards obstruct people's engagement with their environment, including in parks, built heritage or the landscape, and by exhorting people to become mere consumers rather than active citizens. they adversely affect the sense of citizenship that people have for their community and their area. And while advertising benefits from the rights of freedom of information and expression, it's also capable of undermining these rights for other people. So consumers relinquish their privacy and consent to becoming targets of advertising, in particular digital advertising, which is something we're really looking at in terms of the digital screens that are becoming so prevalent in the UK. And the UN Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights notes that in many cases, consumers and citizens are not fully aware that their privacy is being breached and to what extent, and what this entails in terms of their freedom of thought and opinion. So the issue of consent, therefore, needs to be increasingly included in discussions about the impact of advertising and marketing on human rights. So, for example, what we're finding quite often with the screens that are being put up in cities in the UK, some advertising screens contain sensors which measure an individual's gaze, which is known as eye tracking, which is actually involving people in large-scale advertising experimentation without their prior or informed consent, and people just don't know that that's happening, and so that's in breach of their human rights. So what can we use to look at these issues in terms of human rights law and treaties and articles and information? So there are multiple articles in human rights treaties that do provide protection to children and adults against the harms from advertising. And these can be leveraged to advocate against unethical advertising and consumerism. And that's what the report talks about, how these international instruments can be used to talk about advertising. So you can see on the image here how different rights are violated by advertising in different ways. And then those are the rights that can then be looked at through these international instruments. So if we view consumerism within the framework of human rights, we'll find more opportunities to challenge its harms through existing agreements that are designed to protect those rights. So, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals, you might have heard of those. Number 12 is on responsible production and consumption and commits all UN member states by 2030 to halve per capita global food waste at the retail and consumer levels, and to substantially reduce waste generation through prevention, reduction, recycling, and reuse. So there are various governments, local councils, local organisations who are looking at the SDGs and trying to fulfil them. So we can lobby local councils and other organisations who are measuring their performance against the SDGs to say that by adopting restrictions on advertising, they can address its role in undermining the progress towards the SDG goals. So you can make that direct link between those things. Here's a long list of some other international tools. The key ones that the report talks about are the human rights treaties. So these are UN instruments which are part of a body of international human rights law and are legally binding treaties. So when states ratify and take them on, they're legally bound by it as part of an international human rights framework, which includes comprehensive implementation measures outlined in the articles, which require enactment in domestic legislation. So they need to bring in laws that mean that they can meet those requirements at an international level. And the human rights treaty bodies are committees of independent experts, and they monitor the implementation of those human rights treaties through a reporting process. And what's useful to know about that as well is that shadow or alternative reports can be produced by NGOs and civil society organisations to assist the committees in evaluating the governments and under the conventions and during the reporting process, and alongside other mechanisms to raise concerns. So there are various mechanisms alongside those treaty bodies that mean people can raise specific concerns about issues, including advertising.
Charlotte, 2 minutes.
All right, okay, let's not talk about the rest of those. There's a big old list, but the last two, it's interesting because they are new ones that are coming in, they're just coming in 2020, 2021. And they're looking at, the environmental due diligence. So they're things to look out for that are coming up. So in terms of ethics, we know that the advertising and marketing industries have a responsibility to market ethical choices or to withdraw from marketing unethical goods. However, we know that they're not doing that. So there are various ways that they don't do that. And I'm going to give a few very quick examples of those now. So, for example, irresponsible food marketing promotes unhealthy food, encourages tons of waste and environmental damage. If we're looking at junk food, we can look at the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the general comments around that. on the impact on children's health. So seeing junk food adverts influences what and how much children eat. Childhood obesity is linked to the development and marketing directly to children of energy-dense, micronutrient-poor foods and beverages, what we call HFSS foods. Food advertising to children increases the consumption of food generally. So in one experiment, children consumed 45% more when exposed to food advertising. However, advertising budgets for unhealthy food and drink far exceed healthy products, and adverts for prepared convenience foods and confectionery account for 60% of food advertising spend in the UK, yet they are breaching children's human rights every day. Anna's going to talk a bit more about this, but just very briefly, we know the social and environmental costs of the fast fashion industry. The fashion industry spends over £280 million on advertising every year in the UK alone. So it's big business, so it must be doing something. And according to the UK government's Environmental Audit Committee, our desire for fast fashion is fueled by advertising, social media, and a supply of cheap garments. So while some brands are seen as progressive, ultimately buying from sustainable brands, even if they say they're sustainable, is not the best way to reduce the fashion footprint. In fact, just buying less is. Similarly, in terms of cars, Rob's going to talk a bit more about the fossil fuel industry, but car ownership in the car industry and increasing sales of cars through advertising have multiple implications for human well-being and the environment, unsurprisingly. Particularly advertising and brandalism have talked about SUVs and the fact that in the UK, the motor industry is the 7th largest sector using outdoor advertising sites such as Billboards, which is creates this mad situation where car companies are using billboards to promote new cars to people who are sitting just in traffic jams making pollution. And as with fast fashion, the key to reducing one's environmental and human impact is actually not to buy the eco version of an SUV, but to rethink your transport entirely. So this is quite complicated, and I probably don't have time to go into this now. But basically, this is the idea that in the report talks about, which is that advertising undermines the environmental and social issues when promoting consumerism. So actually, it gets to the point where we don't want to support environmental issues because we're thinking extrinsically more than intrinsically in terms of community values. So there's a whole big section about that in the report, which I don't have time to go into now, but it's really interesting the way that actually the driving consumption leads to people not wanting to take action locally in communities and on the environment, which is a very worrying trend. So what can we do? Basically, we can all take responsibility by putting pressure on decision makers through highlighting human rights and environmental commitments and standards in our campaigning, and through engaging in complaints to the various human rights committees and instruments or in the reporting processes themselves. And there's lots of details about how you can do that in the full report as well. And finally, so the report has 5 recommendations, what we can do about the impact on advertising on human rights and the environment. Let me just pull out a few. So recommendation 2, boycott advertisers who fail to respect human rights and the environment. So this means products and brands which threaten our children's health, which stereotype and sexualize us, which contaminate our community through billboards, and which sell us stuff we don't need and unhealthy products. And also specifically, you can complain about these types of ads to the Advertising Standards Authority in the UK and ask them to investigate them. So there's something explicit you can do if you see an advert that you know is impacting on human rights and the environment. And then the other rights are all there as well. Sorry, the recommendations are all there. And you'll hear more about the last recommendation 5, which is about celebrating progress being made. From the next speakers are going to talk more about the progress and what you can do. And there's also some really great examples in the report of how people have taken action. And that's very, very quick run through of the report. And that's me done.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Yes, it is a very detailed, long, heavily referenced report, which is well worth having a look. I would say well worth having a look at the summary document particularly. Thank you for doing such a great job at distilling down the main points into a short presentation, much appreciated. And I've added a link to the report in the chat there so everybody can find out more. And of course, thanks to Elizabeth in her absence for writing the report. So next, I'd like to welcome Robert Noyes from Platform. Platforms campaigns focused on the social, economic and environmental impacts of the global oil industry. And Rob coordinates UK Divest, which is a nationwide campaign to end fossil fuel finance and build the movement for a fossil-free world. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks so much, Nicola. Well, I was about to say I'm Rob, but I won't do that because you know I'm Rob now. I've got no slides today, so if you don't like the look of my face, just feel free to look around and just listen instead. I'm sure all of you are concerned about climate change. I'm sure many of you are part of campaigns to tackle climate change. So I guess I want this talk to explain why adverts are quite so important to fossil fuel companies, and why this makes fossil fuel adverts such an urgent and politically important domain of struggle. My talk today is not going to focus much on actual fossil fuel adverts themselves. They're bad, they're boring, and they lie. Neither is it going to look too much at what we can do, more on that later. Rather, I want to look at how, for decades, fossil fuel companies have delayed climate action, how important myth-making is to their continued survival, and how ultimately their aim is to irreversibly link themselves to human progress. By doing so, I think we can better understand how their current focus for achieving this aim, advertising, fits into this. Understanding why it's so important to them helps us understand why ending it is so important for the rest of us. Fundamentally, fossil fuel companies don't want you to know what they do, what they've done, and what they plan to do. They tell stories about themselves, to themselves, and sell those stories to us. But we can't offset stories, so we have to stop them being told and tell different ones. The common narrative of the climate crisis, as told by fossil fuel companies, is as follows. People in the West developed technologies that drove innovation, built the world, and improved everyone's lives by using fossil fuels. Then, tragically, we discovered the harm that burning fossil fuels was causing, but too late. Emissions were locked in, and now we're all doing everything that we can to halt climate breakdown and prevent more emissions. This is compelling because it's no one's fault. It just happened. And now we know that it's happening, we're acting, but it's got a slight problem. It's just not true. The overwhelming majority of emissions have taken place after we knew, beyond doubt, the damage fossil fuels cause. This is easy to demonstrate through graphs and figures, but instead of that, of all people, I'm going to use Taylor Swift to show you what I mean. More than half of all the carbon emissions ever produced in the entire history of humanity have been produced in Taylor Swift's lifetime. More than a quarter have been produced since she released her first album. For those of you less up to date on Taylor's back catalogue and life story than myself, her first album came out in 2006 and she was born in 1989. It might surprise some of us, but when Taylor was born, climate change was high on the political agenda. George Bush Sr., soon to be president, said on the campaign trail that he will tackle the greenhouse effect with the White House effect. NASA scientist Jim Hansen has just published his famous research. 5,000 people have just died in the hottest summer the US has ever seen, and climate change is front page news. Big oil is in crisis. With climate change rising up the political agenda, oil companies are gathering in urgent huddles to work out what to do. By February of 1989, we know from recent litigation that climate change was at the very top of the agenda in oil company boardrooms. And are they concerned about how they implement measures to stop climate change? No. Rather, they're worried about how a tidal wave in public opinion might impact their companies. In a meeting now in the public record, Duane Levine, Exxon's manager of science and strategy development, told the company's board of directors in February 1989 that scientists generally agreed that burning fossil fuels could raise global temperatures significantly with catastrophic consequence. But he adds a crucial line after this primer, and I quote it now. Arguments that we can't tolerate delay and must act now can lead to irreversible and costly draconian steps. A more rational response will require efforts to extend the science and increase emphasis on costs and political realities. Exxon's position at this time is a playbook honored by fossil fuel companies around the world ever since. And it's probably best summed up in another quote from 1989, this time in an internal memo from their public affairs manager, which reads as follows. Exxon position: emphasized the uncertainty in scientific conclusions regarding the potential enhanced greenhouse effect. This approach of manufacturing doubt about the climate crisis was the central approach of the oil industry in maintaining itself over the last decades of the 20th century and the early years of the 21st. Now, of course, there are different tactics employed by fossil fuel companies. Doubt about whether climate change is real is no longer palatable to the public. So now it's a different doubt they seek to develop, the role of fossil fuel companies in tackling climate change. But the logic is still the same. Above all else, fossil fuel companies can and must prevail. Today, the tactic of oil companies is different. It's what we're talking about today, advertising. That tidal wave in popular opinion against fossil fuel companies has happened. Tackling climate change is high on the political agenda again. In the UK, public support for climate action is higher than it has ever been before. So fossil fuel companies need to ally themselves with this cause, and they need to make a lot of noise about it. They make, frankly, nonsense net zero commitments. Just one example, Shell's net zero commitments from 2019 are based on planting more trees than there are in the entire carbon offset market. They talk of the urgent need to develop solutions, and crucially, they make sure that everyone knows just how committed to climate action they are. Over the past 3 decades, just 5 major oil companies have spent £2.5 billion on adverts specifically rebranding themselves as part of the solution to the climate crisis. Now, I'm not really very interested in showcasing any of these adverts or in unpicking why they're all utter nonsense. In 2020, fossil fuel companies spent just over 1% of average annual capital expenditure on alternative energy. Many spent more on their marketing department. At a push, some might get to 6% soon. No net zero pledge is compliant with the Paris Agreement. What I am interested in doing, however, is talking about why they do this and what that means for us in challenging it. Fossil fuel companies exist to extract, produce, and burn fossil fuels. The only other thing they focus nearly as much time on for the lifespan of their existence is myth-making. After all, it's not just the hydrocarbons that a fossil fuel company is selling, it's a culture closely associated with American capitalist culture. Fast cars, freedom, open roads, even the smell of petrol is to be romanticized. The coupling of progress and fossil fuels is sacrosanct, a universal law. But this drenching of our culture was not an accidental spill, it was by design. Some of you may know, for example, the wonderful Welsh poet Dylan Thomas. What you may not know, however, is that at the height of his preeminence in 1951, he was commissioned by a company called Anglo-Iranian Oil to write a film script about the work the company did and the benefits it gave to local people. He described what he found in letters to his wife, and I quote now, "I saw rows and rows of tiny Persian children suffering from starvation, and after that had lunch with a man from the company worth £30 million from the rents of peasants all over Iran and from 1,000 crooked deals, a charming, cultivated man." Dylan never finished the script, but the company who hired him, you may know it better by its current name, BP. Even in 1950, this industry was aware of the need to use the arts, to use cultural propaganda, and what is advertising but cultural propaganda, to launder their image. No one would allow them to do what they were doing if they didn't. And honestly, what's changed? Now they use glossy adverts. Why? To keep on doing what they do, make money, and to convince people of their vital role in the past, present, and future. Sustainable? Sure, why not? And it works. At UK Divest, where I work, we run campaigns aimed at changing local council investments. The most common objection by far to this approach of divestment comes from the incorrect belief that fossil fuel companies are changing or that they must play a significant role in building the new world. We must invest in them to help them change. This just isn't true. Will Blockbuster key partners in driving the change to streaming services and Netflix? Can your dog help you learn how to speak French? Until we release ourselves from the boundaries of imagination imposed upon us by these oil companies, we will continue to be constrained in the fight to curb global heating. Ending fossil fuel adverts helps us de-link fossil fuel companies and their role in tackling climate change. Ultimately, this is what is needed. Our children and our children's children need never hear the name Shell, BP, Exxon. By campaigning to end fossil fuel adverts, you can help achieve this. You can help end the stories and build new ones. After all, it should not be our ambition to merely save the world, but to end this world and build a new one. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Rob. That's you've given us a lot to think about there, and lots of things that I didn't know. And yeah, well done for bringing Taylor Swift in to to make such a solid example. Thank you very much for that, and look forward to welcoming some questions for Rob and the other speakers as we move on. So next, I'm really pleased to welcome Anna Breyer. Anna is Director of Advocacy at Labour Behind the Label, who campaign for the rights of garment workers around the world. Welcome, Anna.
Hi, great. Okay, can you see my slides? Is that there? Yes.
Yes, we
Good.
can.
Great. Yeah. Oh, okay. I'm going to time myself to make sure I don't go over. Hang on. Go. Right, good. Yeah, so I work for Labour Behind the Label. We're part of something called the Clean Clothes Campaign, which is a global network of human rights activists and unions on the ground in garment factories who are working to fight for increased wages and human rights in their workplaces. And we're 20 years old this month, just so you know. It's our birthday. So we do public campaigns on things like poverty pay for in garment supply chains and factory safety and how do I move through my slides on this bit? It's not letting me do it. Oh, there it goes. There we go. But we also run things called urgent appeal cases, where if there's a very specific violation that happens in a factory that is owned by H&M, for example, we work alongside a group of, workers who might have certain demands, and then if the brand is Swedish, then someone from the Swedish Clean Clothes Campaign can be involved and try and lobby on the ground in the headquarter country. Or if it's like a Marks and Spencer's factory, then we would take on the case and try and work with the workers to get remedy to the human rights violation that's occurred. And so a lot of that work is behind the scenes, where we would just write to a company and say, hey, this thing's happened in your supply chain, can you do something about it? But also we do then make it go public. So these pictures are, the one in the bottom left hand corner is a case that we recently won with a factory called Kanliani in Thailand, which Tesco were sourcing from, and they eventually ended up paying out to the workers who were Burmese migrants who were owed severance because they'd been fired from the factory. So we work alongside workers and do public campaigns and then try and get resolution, basically. I'm not going to tell you about those things. Right, so I thought I might talk about two companies who we have a kind of long-standing relationship with. I mean, we don't campaign directly about advertising, but we do a lot of truth-telling and myth-busting about greenwash. And Primark is a really key player in this. I mean, we've had a long relationship with Primark, starting from, sweatshop stories with them in the noughties. In fact, when I first joined Labour Behind the Label in 2008, there was a big Panorama documentary about child labour in India. And they were really just getting going at that point and really driving what cheap fashion on the high street looked like, to the extent that, ever since then, high street companies have actually been pushing down prices more so than it did before they existed, I think, and they sort of gave birth to a new era of Matalans and other brands that have really delivered really cheap high street fashion. And Primark were involved in the Rana Plaza disaster, and they were sourcing from one of the factories. There was a factory in Bangladesh that collapsed where 1,134 people died in a massive industrial accident, and Primark were sourcing from one of those factories. So we've had big campaigns on Primark over a number of years, but I think as a result of a lot of public campaign pressure and everybody thinking Primark are the go-to bad brand, they developed quite a clever, light touch, greenwashy kind of approach to how they talk about themselves. This kind of Primark Cares brand, which is on quite a lot of their labeling now in stores. They have a big media section of their website where they really go through they put out a press release about, oh, we've done this nice collaboration with a organic farmer, or we've done this, and it's like product by product. They might say, hey, there's something caring that we're doing. But this latest thing that they've come up with, this We Empower Her, is a campaign that's in loads of stores at the moment, and we took this photo in York a couple of weeks ago, and it's lots of happy ladies from India giggling about Primark and working in their factories. And I guess the reason why it irks me so very particularly, let's move on. Right, there we go. Is well, firstly, because we've been campaigning on Primark for years about the fact that the wages that are paid in their factories are a third or less of the amount that you need to support a family. So actually the economic injustice of what their model pushes is people living in poverty around the world. But secondly, during the pandemic, Primark was one of the many brands who stopped their orders like bang on and refused to pay for vast quantities of garments that had already been made in factories with workers who were already owed the wages that for what they had produced, and because the way that the system works is you pay for it when it gets on board the boat. And so there were all these big piles of garments in Bangladeshi factories that were not being bought by brands, and then refused to honour ongoing commitments in a bunch of different factories, which has resulted in billions of dollars in wages being owed to garment workers around the world. So for the 13 months of the pandemic, it's been calculated that $11.85 billion are owed to workers in factories. This isn't just Primark, to workers in garment factories around the world, because of the way that that brands stopped orders and then reduced orders and didn't take responsibility for people who had been making their clothes ongoing. So basically the impact of the economic stoppage, the brands passed on. They passed it on to the factory owners, and then that in turn got passed on to the workers, and the workers were the people who shouldered the burden, and Primark were one of the main people who we've been lobbying about this fact that they need to commit to say that they should pay their workers for the duration of the pandemic and ensure that their wages were at the normal level, because these are women who are protesting now who who were already living on kind of a poverty wage and were then forced further into debt because of the way in which Primark operated. So We Empower Her, absolute bollocks. What's my next page slide? There we go. Oh, sorry. So what have we done about Primark over the years? So looking back through our various demos, and my favourite one that we ever did was with a guy called Reverend Billy and the Church of Stop Shopping, and they are brilliant activists from the States who tour around to various different places and do performative theatre. Reverend Billy is a preacher, and we went into a Primark store in Bristol when it was just opening, and did something called a telephone chorus, where everyone who was in their gospel choir all went in on their phones, and our activists went in on their phones going, oh yeah, we've heard about Primark, yeah, we hear they use child labour, and it was kind of getting louder and louder and louder, and then after about 3 minutes of everybody going, yes, Primark uses sweatshop labour, Reverend Billy like burst out of the changing room with a big megaphone going, preach, repent, all you who have shopped here. And anyway, it was a really great demonstration. Really enjoyed it. Sorry, but we also have been doing quite a lot of ad busting on Primark of late about this thing to do with the to pay your workers to do with the pandemic and the amount of money that is owed to workers in garment supply chains. This is something that this ad is something that we worked on with an artist who did that for us, which is really great. And we stickered it in a bunch of different places. This is us stickering Primark in Bristol, but we during the pandemic, when the shops weren't open, it was quite difficult to target brands by doing demos outside. But we tried to do quite a lot of online advertising, sharing of images in order to try and myth bust some of the things that they were saying. So, oops, right. Okay, yeah, and then I want to talk really quickly about Boohoo as well. So this was another big thing that we did during the pandemic. I mean, I don't know whether people are aware of kind of how fashion is really changing through online advertising, and these big e-retailers really using aggressive advertising policies to get through social media into teenagers' spaces and influencers, and anyway, but Boohoo would have been some of the really big winners of the pandemic, in that they have an e-retail approach where they make 50 of like 1,000 lines in a bunch of really tiny little shops, and then they product test them through like A/B testing on marketing, and then they upscale to make like big batches of the products that are successful. And so whereas the high street in Bristol, the UK high street brands have really lost out and plummeted, Boohoo made millions and then bought out a whole load of other companies at the end of the pandemic. But a lot of that success has been based on using workers in Leicester who've been paid £3 an hour for, I know, many years. And actually we were working with academics at Leicester University who had done research around what was happening in Leicester factories since 2015, looking at kind of what the trends were and what was being done to try and approach that, how to ensure that those wages were lifted and those workers had complaints mechanisms and access to unions, and how to improve the industry. And during the pandemic, we brought out a big report about how workers were being asked to come into factories while there was significant COVID risk, and we were still being paid £4 an hour. And we worked with quite a lot of media outlets on it, and it got some quite big splashes, in fact. And yeah, as a result of it, this is our petition. We were delivering a petition to Boohoo. Actually, this was from before the pandemic. About them. So one of the solutions to it is that Boohoo need to be honest about where their clothes come from, because there's been a lot of like hiding of, oh no, we don't source there, and oh, that's nothing to do with us. And actually, to be honest, like the removing of responsibility for workers' rights and the supply chain and the environmental impact and everything, companies distance themselves from that stuff and just try and be like just the plastic face of fashion and don't want to be associated in any sort of way with their supply chain. And so one of the big pushes that we've been doing over the last few years is about transparency and calling on brands to actually publish their supply chains. So yeah, through petitions and ad busts and various different things, we were pressuring Boohoo for a number of years. And actually they were called to give evidence at the Environmental Audit Committee at the end of 2020, and we worked with MPs to get questions and to bring them to talk there about about whether they would or they would not publish their supply chain, and they said at that meeting that they would in 9 months' time, and they have just done it. So it's just happened and we've just won, so that's great. But I mean, it doesn't mean that stuff is better, but what it means is that we that it's now they have to take responsibility for the list that they've put out there of saying this is where our stuff is made, and we take responsibility for it, ensuring that the human rights and environmental impact due diligence is done within those premises. So some of the things that we did, this is kind of an ad bust that we did around Manchester, where Boohoo's where Boohoo's head office is based, and we also tried last Black Friday to do an Instagram deluge where we did hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ad busts of Boohoo Instagram images, and then put little speech bubbles out of the ladies saying, hey, I was only paid, these clothes were, the workers were paid £3.50 an hour to make these clothes. Who's paying for that? And yeah, various different things. And the lesson from that was that it's very difficult to actually break into a giant social media feed, because even with hundreds and hundreds of posts, like there are thousands and thousands of posts per hour happening on a hashtag that is to do with Boohoo. But anyway, it was interesting to do. And you know, some of these kind of online tactics of how do we take on online advertising, I think is really interesting to discuss. And yeah, I'd like to unpack it further with people if you'd like to at some other time. And I just wanted to finish by saying a few things about what I think people should do. Yeah, I mean, firstly, we can talk about this in Q&A if anyone's interested, but I really strongly feel that our power within garment supply chains is not to be consumers, which is what we're told often, to, you know, shop using this label or that label or something more ethical or da, da, da. But is our power as citizens to stand in solidarity and to be really clued up about what is really happening with our clothes, where they come from, and then to ask questions or complain. So yeah, you can have lots of easy ways to do that by joining Labour Behind the Labels mailing list, and we can we'll send you actions that you can do. One very specific action you can do right now is sign the Pay Your Workers petition, which is about calling on all brands to commit to say that they will ensure that workers who made their clothes during the pandemic are paid for the duration of that time. We're also about to launch a new activist toolkit on our website. So in about a month's time, if you want to check it out, there's going to be loads and loads of new and great resources, including new videos and how-to guides and various different things, including something about advertising. Yeah, and then I think important to say that our power is about telling the truth and spreading the truth about consumerism, actually in all products, not just in fast fashion, but that we should share information about where our clothes from and start conversations and talk about it. In particular, I'm a really annoying shopper, but I do ask staff whenever I buy anything about what they're doing to ensure human rights where their clothes are made. Yeah, and also just to say, we have a direct action WhatsApp group for people who are organising in various cities, including people who go stick up posters like the Boohoo ones. So if you're interested in that, then message me. So yeah, that's me.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Anna, for that really informative talk and really entertaining look at some of the campaigning actions that you've done. It looks good fun. So I just last of all would like to welcome Robbie Gillett from Advocacy Cities. Robbie is Arts Director at Advocacy Cities and is going to talk to you for a few minutes about some of the recent actions that we've seen aiming to ban fossil advertising. Robbie, over to you.
Thanks very much, Nicola. I will have to be quick as I tell the story of some recent actions that's happened. What's really exciting about the fight against corporate advertising and all the different ways that it affects us is that many new organisations are beginning to come into the anti-advertising space to realise that whether it's around the issues of fast fashion, workers' rights, environmental destruction, that advertising is being used to cover up that corporate image and those corporate impacts. So I'm going to just talk about a recent European action. I'm going to try and share my screen that happened about 10 days ago. Hopefully this works nicely. And it's called European Days of Action Against Fossil Advertising and Sponsorship. And yeah, it took place from the 7th to the 10th of October, and it's actually supporting an EU initiative, a European Citizens Initiative, it's called, to get 1 million signatures to propose a new law banning fossil fuel advertising and sponsorship for the EU Commission to formally consider that. And it's a mechanism that's been used for glyphosate, to bring in a new law around glyphosate, weed killer, before. So it's a kind of little known mechanism, but that's what's happening now. Back in Brexit Britain, sadly, we can't take part in that initiative, but lots of NGOs such as Amnesty International, Global Witness, Greenpeace International, ActionAid, etc., are joining that initiative. But I wanted to bring it back to what we started. I just in London today have seen some of these adverts that the Days of Action were protesting about. So this is just from today. I saw on one bus stop, kind of back-to-back greenwash as we go into the COP26 in Glasgow next month. We're seeing a ramping up from fossil fuel interest, whether that's the airline industry, the car industry, as well as the oil majors like Shell, BP, etc. Just pushing their false solutions and presenting themselves as green. So this says destination zero emissions. We are championing a future of zero emission flights. That's just not true. That's just saying we're going to do something in the future. We've got an intention, and it involves a lot of carbon offsetting. And then from HSBC, who are one of the largest UK banks investing in fossil fuels, just today on the same bus stop, like this was back-to-back adverts in public space from big corporations, presenting themselves as green. It's talking about investing in tree planting in the UK, and then another advert a few seconds later talking about all the money they're going to put into green technologies, when actually they've invested around £67 billion in fossil fuels in the last 5 years, HSBC. Anyway, so that those adverts that I saw today in public space felt very pertinent to today's talk, so I just wanted to share them. But here's just a quick 1 minute wrap up video from the European Days of Action, which shows some of the things that happened. But wait, I didn't optimize for video. Mistake and error. Allow me to do that again. Share sound, optimize video clip. Sorry guys. All right, here we go. Oh no, now it's not words. Bear with me. Okay, so that's just a quick wrap up. And now we're just going to fly through some images from the European Days of Action that happened in the UK, Sweden, Belgium, France, and other places. The Brandalism Network, a guerrilla network of artists and installation teams who hack public space with satirical artworks, did a bunch of different installations, kind of parodying and satirizing fossil fuel companies or high carbon companies. And crucially, they tried to bring in the advertising agencies into the debate as well. So Advocacy Cities had the pleasure of doing the comms for Brandalism, did a kind of Twitter takeover of the accounts, and got to talk about the installations that Brandalism done. So here we see a kind of spoof EasyJet advert with their advertising agency, VCCP. Also seeing stuff about the airline industry not really having a credible plan for reducing emissions, but just like I showed earlier today, they've got lots of greenwash adverts, as well as companies like BP and their advertising agency, Ogilvy. Just jump back to some other actions that happened. This is Stockholm, where local activists have been pushing the municipal council in Stockholm to introduce a ban on advertising for high carbon products. And in Bristol, there was a kind of temporary cover-up where we, Adblock Bristol, posed a question and then dangled some pens and allow people to repurpose that corporate advertising space for a different community purpose. Skipping ahead, just going to briefly say how you can get involved in Adfree Cities, because As Anna said, our power is not in consumers and shifting what we spend to other companies, but our power is in coming together and taking collective action. So Advocacy Cities is a network of local ad block groups in Bristol, Cardiff, Exeter, Leeds, Birmingham, Norwich and Lambeth. We've been going about 15 months, building on the forerunner of the Ad Block Bristol campaign that we started a few years ago. What we do is local organising to try and get local wins, like stopping new billboards. And we use policy, we lobby for policy change at local councils, and we also showcase arts alternatives, as Nicholas said at the start. And here's just a bit about our theory of change. We want to encourage local groups to get local wins, to encourage more local organising. And we want to use arts to draw in people's creativity, to bring new people into the movement, and train up new organisers, and skill people up with online organising tools, to improve their social media reach, to organise public meetings, to become organisers. And with that local momentum, we want to lobby local councils to get policy change. And with those local groups, we want to build a national movement. We're very much a movement orientated network. Adfree Cities, movement building is what we're aspiring to do. So we've got some guides for people looking to start new groups. If you haven't got a group in one of these cities, we've got some good guides about getting started, and Charlotte and myself are here to support new groups. If you do want to create a new group in your hometown or city, we've got some guides about how to do that. And you can follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. We're at Adfree Cities. I'll stop there and pass back to you, Nicola.
Thank you, Robbie. I'm just going to unpin you so you're not the big face on the recording anymore. There we go. Great, thank you very much for that. I just find it so inspiring to hear about the possibilities and the collective power that we can have when we come together to challenge what can seem to be this kind of unassailable might of industries like the fossil industry and fashion industry, you know, and the junk food industry and some of the others that have been mentioned today. So thanks very much for this kind of very broad tour of some of the big problems, but also the power that we can have. So I'd just like to move on to some questions. We've got about 10-15 minutes for questions, so thank you to everybody for firing your questions in. I'm just trying to find where my chat is now. Here we go. Right, so the first question I'd like to go to is from Veronica. And Veronica asked a question specifically to Rob, and I'm just scrolling up to find it. And it was, so Rob, you mentioned talking to councils and coming up against the idea that fossil companies are part of the solution. And how do we get past that?
Hi, Veronica. Yeah, really good question. I think a couple of things. One is obviously like myth busting is part of it, but it's definitely not the whole thing of just like repeating the fact that like we still have the misconception, for example, that fossil fuels are cheaper than renewables. They haven't been since 2018. Like noting in every meeting that you might have that they spend less than 1% of their annual capital expenditure on alternative technology, that kind of stuff. Then you also got to look at local presence of oil companies if they were there, because a lot of, in the development of Crude Britannia, as we might call it, there were lots of oil company towns that then became abandoned when the profits weren't there. So is there a story to be told about like economic damage and job loss when oil companies left? Then the key things are, we've got to build a fossil-free culture. You know, we know what the culture of oil looks like. It's cars, it's freedom, but what's the culture of renewables? What's the culture of a post-carbon world? And how do we build that? And how do we get people involved in that? And lastly, the key thing, sounds like I'm just hyping Robbie, but I kind of am, which is just like tackle it at the source. You know, we've got to ban the ads. You've got to put up your own, you've got to reclaim public space and tell your own story as much as ending the other one.
Great, thank you very much, Rob. There was a question from Pamela, which was specifically to Adfree Cities, asking about whether we are thinking of challenging the greenwash of the animal agriculture industry, which is a really good question. And yes, it is something that we talk about. We don't have a project on that at the moment, but it is something that we're looking at and we do think is really important. Actually, there was a really good video that was done recently by Surge Activism looking at what they call humane washing, and which really was quite yeah, I mean, the same tactics are used, right? The food industry uses fake farm names. There was M&S used a fake, they sort of invented a fake lake, which they apparently, get their salmon from, and it doesn't even exist. So I mean, it's just lies. Actually, it's not even bending the truth. It's just out and out lies. It's a really interesting video, and one that we have shared, and I would encourage you to look that up. So really good question, Pamela. I mean, watch this space and do drop us an email if you've got some ideas around that. We are planning to do to produce a resource at some point in the future around the links between factory farming and advertising. And yeah, like I say, certainly something we're interested in, something we considered including as part of this event, but couldn't look at all of it. Pamela also asked another question, which I'd like to put to all our speakers, which was specifically Pamela asked about, do we think petitions work? I wonder if we could think about that question, but also maybe broaden it to think about what tactics do we think work best in your experience? Who would like to start with that one? Maybe Robbie? Do petitions work, and what other actions might work equally as well or better?
I think petitions are, they're a low bar action. They're a very easy action for people to take. They're useful for actually pulling in a constituency of interested people, and then from there you can springboard onto other types of organising and action. Their effectiveness for changing policy single-handedly as the only tactic is quite limited, but actually in conjunction with lots of other tactics, and particularly as a base building tool, petitions do have their role, I think, and you just don't want to overdo them.
Anna, do you have any comments on that one particularly?
I was just thinking of one example of when we had our website was broken, and I was doing an action that was targeting Next, and then I fixed it, and it sent 10,000, or it wasn't that many, okay, it must have been like 7,000 emails to one guy's email address all at once. And then like within 10 minutes he rang me up to say, there's all these emails in my inbox. So sometimes it does work. That was a bit of an error, but yeah, I agree with Robbie that it is often about just like a way of like mobilizing a lot of activists around something to then deliver them another set of different messages and actions that they can do. I think it works as a combination of a lot of other pressure, lobbying, political action, things outside shops, media, and sometimes really big petitions, like the day that the Rana Plaza factory collapsed, the week that followed, 1 million people signed a petition calling on the brands to ensure compensation was paid to the families of the victims, and that kind of thing just really signals this is the mood of the country, and then as a brand you can't really do very much about that. I think sometimes little petitions do different things, and I think really big petitions do something quite different, and then ones in between are sometimes a bit yeah. Thank
you. Rob, any comments from you on effectiveness?
Yeah, probably nothing much to add. Like any other tactic, like make sure you're aware of why you're using it and use it to that end, not any other end. So it's useful to build momentum, build a mailing list potentially for a campaign that you're doing and raise awareness, but it's not going to be like the be all and end all, right?
Yes, thank you. Charlotte, feel free to comment on that, but also I've got another question to put to you, and which Anna might want to come in and comment on as well, which is another one from Veronica on specifically thinking about that We Empower Her campaign from Primark. Can we use something like Elizabeth's At What Cost report and thinking about that reframing of consumerism as a rights issue to fight against these kinds of campaigns by fashion industry?
Yeah, I think so, and I think that would fit really well with the human rights treaty bodies process, which Elizabeth talks about in the report. One of the examples that I didn't talk about when I was talking about the different treaty bodies is that in 2013 the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, so looking at women's rights as workers, in terms of violence against women, in terms of sexism, so across all issues that impact on women. They criticised the government for the prevalence of stereotypical imaging and objectification of women in the media and advertising, and that came from a report that had come from the UK called the Levinson report. But the committee recommended that the government continue to engage with the media to eliminate stereotypical imaging of women and their objectification in the media, especially in advertising. So that could be an example of where these images by Primark are used as a way to greenwash this idea when actually it's stereotypical and it's not helpful, and it's not doing what it should be doing in terms of women's rights. And the result of this was that there was an action by the Advertising Standards Authority, which included a report called Depictions, Perceptions and Harm, a report on gender stereotypes in advertising, which came out in 2017. So that's an example of where this kind of international human rights instrument, which is quite clunky, ended up with something happening at a UK level, and then the government then hopefully taking action to make changes at a kind of legal level or in terms of legislation in the UK. And with this report coming out, so now the Advertising Standards Authority have an understanding of that as well. So then if you report things to them, other adverts to them, they'll probably, and like quote that report, they'll probably be able to like do something with it and have a better understanding about what the issues are. So that's a bit of a long-winded process, but I would say that, yeah, absolutely, in those kind of cases, you can use that kind of wider international legislation and processes to then link to what's going on at a national level.
Thanks, Charlotte. Anna, would you like to add anything to that?
Just really quickly, some colleagues in Sweden managed to bring a consumer misinformation case against H&M around some stuff that they put about empowering women, and I think they did win that H&M had to take it down, but they it was quite a long way gone at that point, and it was it was a moral victory in some sort of way, but I seem to remember from the case that the problem was about the specific text of the advert could be backed up by some actions that they were doing. So things like the "We Empower Her" thing, is about general myth making, isn't it? It's like generally saying, oh yeah, great, and they probably can back it up with 5 projects that they're doing which are specifically for the empowerment of women, that cost £10,000 or something. But the general business model of what we're trying to tackle is the thing that is not empowering women and deliberately undermining that fact. So, but it's I think sometimes that falls down when you're trying to bring these type of cases, but we'll see.
Thank you, Anna. Right, we are going to wrap up in a minute or two. Apologies, we haven't had time to cover all the questions. I can see there's an interesting chat off the back of a question by Paul around the effectiveness of the ASA, which, Adrian, thank you for providing some comments on that. I probably would have put this question to Robbie. So Robbie, if you have a moment to respond on any views on the effectiveness of the ASA in the chat, please feel free to do that. But in a moment, I'm going to invite all speakers just to share a few words in conclusion. But while you think about that, speakers, I'm just going to share a couple of announcements. Our group Adblock Leeds, for anybody in the Leeds area, or if you know people in the Leeds area who might be interested, Adblock Leeds did start up a couple of years ago, but due to the pandemic, haven't had a chance to do any face-to-face events, but they are doing their first launch event on the 13th of November, which we'll send around details of afterwards. So do join that and share that if that's you. In case any of you are going to be attending the Green Party conference this weekend, Advocacy Cities and Advertising will be there, talking about how local campaigners and councillors can push for local policies to restrict harmful advertising. We'll send more details about that on our social media channels as well. There's also lots of ways to take action locally, which we'll send around as part of the follow-up email, some of which Robbie has mentioned. And just finally, we'll send around the recording of the event, and we'll post out your posters within the next week or two. So before we close, before I stop, if I can just invite the speakers to share any final comments that you have, and also just a big thank you from me for speaking this evening and giving such fantastic talks. Charlotte, should we start with you?
Thanks so much to the other speakers, and I think it's really important to see that kind of activism on the ground, like what people can do on an everyday basis, or like in terms of bigger actions like what was happening recently across Europe. I suppose with the At What Cost report, it's a really useful document, but it is enormous and it's quite sort of dense and hard to get into. But I suppose what's useful about it is that you can draw out different sections of it and different bits of evidence. It's like a literature review of all the information about why advertising is bad and how that links to human rights and environmental degradation. So yeah, so you can draw out all those bits, and I think that's part of the wider kind of conversations that we're having. Like in some situations, we need to be talking at that kind of high academic level, and we need to be using that evidence and that information depending on the audience. So it can be really useful. And again, at that kind of international human rights instruments level, SDGs and like the UN committees, we need to sometimes be working at that level as well as all the other things that we're doing. So I think it's really useful to give us that other tool in the toolbox.
Thank you. Anna, I know you need to shoot off. Would you like to, any wrap-up comments from you to share before you have to head off?
Yeah, just that it's been really fascinating to hear from other speakers, and I feel like we've got so much more in common than working in our silos, thinking about like our very specific industry and how do we combat it. And I really appreciate this idea about thinking about advertising as a overarching evil and how we could learn from each other to move forward on this. So I'm interested in talking to, if anyone's interested in talking more about how to combat online advertising. I know that there's a lot of stuff about very specific physical advert sites, but fashion advertising is increasingly becoming a social media, getting in your face stuff. So if anyone's interested in talking about that, I'd really like to discuss that. Also, if anybody does think that fast fashion is something that they'd like to put some time into, then do email me, Anna at Labour Behind the Label, to get on our activist group where we're doing local actions in different cities.
Thanks very much, Anna. Rob, over to you for any final comments.
Nothing really, just thanks a lot. Cheers, it was really good. I think we're going to win, so keep it up.
Excellent, thank you. Positive words. Robbie, any final comments from you?
Just an encouragement for everyone to write to a local councillor and to take collective action and organise.
Great, yes, seconded. And just finally, thanks ever so much again to all our speakers for this evening, and to all of you for joining and for wanting to take action. And hopefully you found the way, some new ways that are right for you to take action, and some links to follow. So without further ado, I'm going to stop the recording and wish you all good night and thank you.